Erev Tov, everyone. So let's continue our discussion about the minhagim of the 3 weeks. Last night we got up to the topic of music. We're just about to begin discussing. So we'll talk a lot about music during the 3 weeks. There are a lot of different opinions and a lot to unpack here. I'm going to read through the Pnei Halacha. I'm not going to agree with everything that he says inside, but we will discuss. So he says as follows. He says, Yesh omrim, as we saw yesterday, by the way, it doesn't say anywhere that you cannot. It's not written in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Achronim. It's later Achronim, yes, but it's not. But certainly in the Gemara Rishonim, Shulchan Aruch, it doesn't say that you cannot listen to music during the 3 weeks. Same thing about Sfirat HaOmer as well, by the way. But it says we should not have rikudim or mecholot. It's generally translated as dancing, or, and again, the type of music that's going to lead, you would have at a wedding celebration that would lead to dancing. That is forbidden. Where do we get the idea that there can be no music at all during the 3 weeks? I mentioned yesterday that we do have in the Gemara an idea that there should not be music at all, ever, throughout the year, which we are not so makbid on for various reasons. And there are justifications why we don't uphold this practice. But certainly during the 3 weeks is a time, at least the 9 days, the time when we are meant to be thinking about and reflecting on the Churban. It's a time to take that to heart and to be a little bit more makbid about these things. Just as well, by way of introduction, that there are essentially 3 reasons for the different practices that we have throughout the 3 weeks, certainly in the 9 days. And the 3 reasons are, number 1, we avoid things which are dangerous, right? We're extra vigilant in terms of safety. Number 2 is, as we said, things which bring us joy that we try and decrease. And again, we spoke last night about the distinction between the beginning of the 3 weeks versus the beginning of Rosh Chodesh. And the third reason, which is connected to the second, but we find a lot in the poskim, they talk about hesech hadat, talk about things that are going to distract you from the avilut of the Churban. There's a concept that during this time, certainly as we get closer to Tisha B'Av, that's what we should be thinking about. That's what we should be focusing on. So things which are going to take our mind off it, we should not be engaged too much in things that this is the time of year that's set aside for this. Certainly on the day of Tisha B'Av itself, this is proper and leading up as well. So he writes here regarding music. He says, Yesh omrim, shekmo she'asur lishma klei negina b'alpah chayav b'shlosh hashavuot. Certainly, to go into here, to listen to live instruments during the 3 weeks, that's something which we would avoid. So there are those who say, kach asur l'shamam derech machshirei chashmal beitiyim. Is listening to the radio, listening to online, right, listening to music, is that considered the same as a live instrument? So those who say yes. Okay, he says, and those who say that if you're listening to something recorded without any music in the background, what's known as a capella, then that would be permitted. Quotes here, it goes Moshe, Yechavedat, Rav Ovadia, who said it. And there are those, the Tzitz Eliezer, who says that the moment you're listening to recorded music, that's equivalent to listening to an instrument, and that would be forbidden. Now Rav Melamed writes as follows. He says, there are those who are lenient nowadays to listen to music, recorded music. He says, that which was forbidden is when we're talking about a live, going to a concert, and you're hearing, and there's a certain celebration, hearing a musical instrument, that's forbidden. But according to this opinion, shmiat klei negina derech machshirim chashmaliyim ein chagigiyut. Says when you're listening to you're listening in the car, you're listening at home to something recorded, there's nothing, so you do that all the time. There's nothing so celebratory about it. V'omnam, כשהחלו לייצר את מכשיר הרדיו והטייפ הראשונים, when they first invented the radio and the tape, and this first came out, הייתה חגיגיות ושמחה בשמיעת הניגונים. Then it was very celebratory. Wow, you can listen to a tape. That had a higher level of שמחה. אולם כיום, שהכל רגילים לשמוע בכל המוזיקה על ידי מכשירים חשמליים, אין בזה כל כך שמחה, וממילא אין איסור לשמוע בשלושת השבועות. So he says nowadays, again, we're so used to listening to music and listening to in the background. So he wants to say that one can follow those, we'll see in a moment, but he wants to follow those opinions that say that there's no problem listening to recorded music in the 3 weeks. I would not agree with that. I would not take it so far. I'd say not so fast. Let's read the next distinction. Because as I mentioned yesterday, I think the main distinction to be aware of. Certainly, there's a distinction between live music from live instruments that everybody says is forbidden. We're listening to recorded, whether it's a cappella or whether it's from an instrument. I'll just say I don't think there's much of a difference. When you talk about a cappella, so you have to talk. There's two types of a cappella music. There's a cappella where you listen and you can hear that somebody is singing and that there is no music in the background. But most of the a cappella that you hear today is not like that. Most of you would listen to it if you didn't know. So you wouldn't know that. You wouldn't think that they're playing. They do all sorts of things, beatboxing and whatever, and they make all sorts of sound effects that it's meant to imitate the sound of music. It's meant to sound like there are musical instruments. So it's the same level of chagigiyut. It's the same level of simcha. It's right. It seems, to my mind, it seems more like a loophole than anything else to say if the type of a cappella music that you really can't tell unless somebody tells you, the only reason you know that it's a cappella is because it's the 3 weeks and you're listening to the religious radio station. Okay, so I would be hesitant to rely on that. But the next distinction is as follows. He says, "Yesh lechalek benigunim shel simcha lenigunim regilim." Okay, this is really the distinction. What type of music are we're talking about? Recorded music. What type of music are we listening to? Shelak nigunim shel simcha. So certainly the type of music, right, upbeat, the music that you would play at a wedding, the music that you would dance to, music that's going to lead to celebration, it's expressing celebration, that type of music, that one should not listen to. Now he says, over here, he says, Naval nigunim regilim, v'kal v'chomer nigunim atzuvim. He says, ordinary music that you would listen to, I guess soft music, not so upbeat, and sad music. So he writes, ein le'asor b'shlosh shavuot. He says that we do not need to prohibit. וכן למדנו שבעת הלוויה עצמה נהגו להביא חלילים ולנגן בהם כדי לעורר צער ובכי על הנפטר. Today's the Gemara. They would bring flutes and all sorts of musical instruments to the levaya, to the funeral, and they would play in a way, not to dance, of course, but to cause people to, use the music to cause sorrow and to cause people to cry. והיה זה בכלל מצוות לוויית המת, and that was part of the mitzvah. מכאן Therefore, from here you could say that there is no just hearing music in and of itself is not the problem. But the prohibition of listening to music during days of Avelut is listening to music that's going to cause joy. Rav Eliezer Melamed Tzfar, Rav Zalman Melamed from the Rosh of Beit El, he says, שלא רק שמותר להשמיע שירים עצובים על החורבן בליווי כלי נגינה דרך הרדיו בתשעת הימים. He says sad songs about the Khurban. Not only are you allowed to listen to them during the 9 days, אלא יש בזה אף מעלה. But there is something positive about this. שעל ידי כך הלבבות מתעוררים יותר לטבל על החורבן. Because it's going to awaken you, it's going to arouse you to connect to the feelings of the Khurban. So for example, when you have a film on Tisha B'Av, not a movie matinee, but you have a film, an educational, a documentary or whatever it is that's about the theme of the day, and it has certain background music that you don't have to cover your ears, you don't have to walk out when there's background music in the film. That's appropriate. That's part of the day. That's okay. But essentially, he makes 3 distinctions. So the 2 extremes are clear. I think I would say as follows: the type of music that's very, very upbeat, that's going to cause you to get up and dance, etc., that is forbidden. That's whether it's instruments, whether it's recorded, that we don't listen to during these days. The type of music that is there, the background, it's sad songs. It's part of it. It's part of creating the mood. It's part of the feeling of bringing about the sorrow and the mourning of the Khurban. So that is permitted. What about the type that's in between? Okay, so over here is where I would argue slightly. I think he says, I'll read you his concluding paragraph. He says, says we can divide it into 3 categories. As we've just said, wedding songs and the like, that you should not listen to. Then he says, the second category is ordinary music. It's not so upbeat, it's not such a simcha, but it's also not sad music. He says that is most of the music today, and most classical music. So he says that you should not listen to from Rosh Chodesh Av. That part I would agree with. Right, sad songs of mourning, etc. You could listen to even through the 9 days. Again, what about this period now until Rosh Chodesh? What about ordinary sort of background music? So I would suggest, again, if somebody wants to rely on this, that, we're talking about soft music, not particularly upbeat. Somebody wants to rely on it. Somebody wants to listen to it. There's definitely what to rely on. I think that it's probably more appropriate to refrain from it in this period, because at the end of the day, as we mentioned yesterday, from Yud Zayin B'Tammuz until Rosh Chodesh Av, right? It's not that there's not that much that we do. There's not that much that we change. Okay, Ashkenazi custom. We don't have weddings, as we said. We don't have haircuts. We don't shave. But we spoke about Hasachat Hadat to help us get into the atmosphere, I think, of these days and start thinking about the Churban, and not just not just from Rosh Chodesh Av. It's one of the things. It's one of the most noticeable changes, as I mentioned on the fast day. Person wakes up in the morning, gets himself distracted the whole day, gets to the end of the fast and says, "Wow, I wasn't even hungry, I wasn't even thirsty, I didn't notice there was a fast at all." So you've completely missed the point. So we could say the same thing, I think, to an extent about this time period, right? It's not that a person should not notice that it's 3 weeks. We should notice there should be a change. If the only thing that's a change is that in this time we don't listen to music, so I think that's a worthy thing to take on, even if there is what to rely on. I'll just say one other thing sometimes comes up. Person's driving. Person's a long journey, and you're late, or you're tired, whatever. You're going to fall asleep. So obviously, if you need music to keep you awake, and that's comes to safety as well, that would be permitted. It shouldn't be the most upbeat, but that's okay to listen to background music in that situation.